Welcome everyone, they call me IntroTechOut and Horizon Forbidden West is coming up on the horizon. With the new gameplay out, I was reminded of my time with Horizon Zero Dawn and I wanted to talk about my experience and what I hope Forbidden West will improve on. Because when I played Horizon Zero Dawn initially, I didn't really enjoy it. I really wanted to like the game, but unfortunately the game lost me through a lot of design decisions that I disagree with. I'm aware most people like Zero Dawn and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not making this video to attack anyone, I'd just like to think critically about my experience with games and why I have certain opinions. If any of the points in this video resonate with you, or if you disagree at any point, you can always discuss further in the comments. Now where to start? Let's go with The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 is currently my favorite game of all time. The main story was enjoyable enough, but the much more compact and intriguing stories of both expansions are what really skyrocketed my enjoyment and in the end made the game so memorable to me. The Witcher 3 is in my opinion the best of the best when talking story-driven RPGs, and it'll be my main point of comparison to Horizon this video, so I can illustrate better why I feel one way or the other. One last thing to set the stage for this video. I believe games only have one goal: immersion. I don't care how they achieve it, whether through story, characters, graphics, music or gameplay, I just want to completely disappear into my games and forget about the boring outside world. Horizon Zero Dawn wasn't immersive to me, I never felt a deep connection to its world, characters and story. I'll go into the details soon, but it's important to understand that this is the only thing I'm asking from Forbidden West. I want it to immerse me. And to immerse a player you don't need to be a perfect game. The Witcher 3 is flawed in major ways, and so are Batman Arkham Knight, The Order 1886, Death Stranding and many more. Yet I loved each of these games because they did a couple things so right that they made me stop caring about the flaws. That's at the end of the day what a great game does. A great game makes you enjoy the good parts so much that you consciously or subconsciously downplay flaws to keep yourself in a state of immersion. So I don't need the next game to take my list and systematically address all issues. I want it to win me over in one or two major ways, so I won't have to care about the rest of the list anymore. Now I won't even fully discuss my list this video. While I definitely have a lot of criticisms of the story, characters, soundtrack and even some things with the combat in Zero Dawn, discussing all of it would make this video way too long. And while fixes in all those areas could bring back my immersion, I personally feel like the biggest area where Forbidden West can improve is the world. It's also the bit we probably know the least about as of now. So what is it about Horizon Zero Dawn's world that I take issue with? Well, first of all, it's one of the most hostile open worlds I've ever played in. In GTA you can access pretty much the entire map without running into conflict. The Witcher 3 has large areas without monsters around settlements and main roads, and a nice variety of low-level enemies that only form momentary obstacles. The game also allows you to easily skip fights by walking past them without ever being seen or followed. But in Horizon, everything that moves in the open world is your enemy. Nowhere is safe, you're constantly running into fights, which can actually take quite long on higher difficulties. 50% of your time in the open world will either be spent fighting enemies, avoiding enemies or running away from enemies. At first it's really cool when you're walking through the jungle and you suddenly see this huge robot that you've never seen before, but after the magic has worn off, fighting them can become a slog. Where a game like Doom throws a lot of fodder enemies at you to keep your kills per second at a decent level, in Horizon you'll often be fighting multiple huge damage sponges at a time. And often for quests you'll be sent all over the game world, meaning you'll be getting into the same fights with the same creatures over and over, as you need to follow the same paths. I feel like combat should have been 10 times more rare in Zero Dawn because it lost its impact so quickly. The big deadly machine should have spawned more randomly in my opinion. I want coming across a big machine to be a truly memorable event instead of something that makes my eyes roll. To be sure about my assessment about the hostility of Horizon world, I did an experiment. I went to the biggest city and ran in a random direction for a while in both Horizon and Witcher 3. In 4 minutes of running in Horizon, I counted at least 10 separate groups of often high-level, high-health enemies. That's a fight you need to avoid roughly every 24 seconds. In The Witcher, I ran for 6 minutes and only came across one easily avoidable low-level enemy. In The Witcher you get a real sense that the wild has been tamed around the large human settlements. Even after you're out the main city, there will be plenty of homes and people to find, and all the paths leading from the city are safe for a really long time. It'll be very hard to find any high-level monsters near them. In Horizon, however, the moment you leave the city, there are basically no people anymore and it's pure untamed wilderness again. There's very little of a gradient and it feels really unnatural to me. The roads are also saturated with enemies, making me question how the tribes communicate, trade and even survive outside of their settlements. It's important to emphasize the level of the enemies again. I don't mean in-game level, I just mean generally how deadly are they. In The Witcher, a high-level enemy is a genuine event. Most of your time in the game is spent exploring, questing and looting, with a subset of the remaining time being spent in combat. with a subset of that subset being time spent fighting big monsters that pose a real threat to you. With how I personally play The Witcher 3, I fight a high level enemy maybe every 2 to 5 hours or so. Yes, hours. So now you can probably imagine how jarring it is to run into groups of 3 Snapmaws every 24 seconds in Horizon. The constant combat encounters don't just have to do with the insane amount of enemy spawns that Guerrilla put into the game. It also has to do with how the world was designed from a landscape perspective. Whether it's a deliberate design decision or design forced by hardware limitations, the world of Horizon is a network of large corridors surrounded by mountains. I find it a really annoying world to traverse at times. You're constantly funneled into these corridors with huge vertical rocks on both sides where the only way is forward. Trying to get somewhere can be tedious sometimes because of the sheer amount of times you have to go around obstacles and the amount of dead ends. And you're always forced into a dozen fights before reaching the end of one of these corridors because you can't go around enemies. Meanwhile in The Witcher, if you see movement up ahead, just go around. You can almost always go left, right, forwards, backwards, everything in between. The Witcher 3 feels so much more like a naturally formed actual world to me as opposed to Horizon, which felt like a level designed by designers. It's the difference between a large open field and a maze. Even if they technically have the same area, the maze just feels way more linear. I really hope Forbidden West will address this because it's hard to be immersed in the world when it's so unfairly hostile to you. This is not my only problem with the world though. Having a hostile world is one thing, but the world is also just really empty. You can walk for long extended periods of time in the game without coming across anything interesting besides endless groups of machines. Basically your only way to interact with the world is to kill robots in it. I get a real feeling that the developers had this mandate that everything in the world should be functional, maybe due to time and budget constraints. As a result, they almost exclusively build structures for quests. Until you do the quest that involves the building or settlement, it has no point basically. Nowhere is that more clear than with the huge tower next to Meridian that you can see from every point in the world pretty much. I was expecting to find something real interesting there. Who wouldn't? But when I finally got to the top, there was essentially nothing. There were a couple houses there and a large circular arena type thing, but they didn't tell me anything about the world. Matter of fact, it was immediately obvious to me that some battle was going to take place there during a quest. And I'm sorry, you can't give me a landmark like that and not have anything to show for it because it makes me less inclined to explore. Imagine you're on a walk and you see a hill and you wonder what's behind it. So you climb the hill and there's another hill. Okay, so you climb that one too and there's another hill. At some point you stop wondering what's beyond the horizon, which is what happened to me. I didn't care anymore. Why would I try to clear every bit of this huge map if I wasn't going to be rewarded with items or a unique landmark to explore or a story to experience? In The Witcher I cannot even count the amount of points of interest. There's constantly things to see, people to speak to, places to loot and environmental storytelling to soak up. And that isn't a coincidence. Witcher 3 utilizes a 30-second rule. The developers basically had to create a point of interest every 30 seconds of traveling. Whether a fallen carriage, tavern, abandoned house, small combat encounter, it doesn't matter. There has to be something the player can get distracted by. The nice thing is that most of these distractions don't just offer something interesting from an experience standpoint, you learn something new about the world. They also often have meaningful loot associated with them. I think the exploration in Horizon could have been much more engaging if the game had a bigger focus on loot and customization. In The Witcher, looting and items were handled well in my opinion, though it did have that classic RPG issue where there are seemingly hundreds of items and you don't want to throw any away, resulting in a cluttered inventory. But still, even if it ends up cluttering a bit, the sheer amount of items keeps you excited to explore and loot because you never know what you'll find. What Witcher especially nailed though is customization. Boots, trousers, cambesons, gloves, swords, even masks, there was a large variety of customization items and weapons and they all had stats associated with them. This again meant that exploration was often rewarded. Maybe you come across an abandoned house and you find a new gambeson that looks cooler and is of higher level than what you currently have. Maybe you kill a high level monster and get rewarded with a high level sword. Some swords I literally kept purely for sentimental sake because I earned it after a difficult fight. Horizon is almost the opposite. There are very few items in the game, both for crafting and customization. This means that combat is inherently way less rewarding. Spend 15 minutes fighting a group of Snapmaws? Well, here you go, take some scraps and a Snapmaw lens or something. You can't inspect the items, there's nothing really interesting you can craft with them, and you can't use them as trophies for customization like you can display monster heads on your horse in The Witcher. These items literally are just a couple words and a simple pictogram that shows you what kind of item it is. And you won't find new bows, new arrows, new crafting recipes, new spears, new clothing in the world. There are no chests that you can loot for cool stuff, no abandoned houses that contain special items. It's all just the same 7 items over and over. I guess you could say that defeating a hard enemy is satisfying in itself, but if they spawn again 15 minutes later, is that really the case? So in other words, there is no incentive to explore, and no incentive to fight machines. I never got anything out of either besides lower health in the up-teamed metal vessel. From what I've seen of Forbidden West, this is not entirely clear yet, but if Guerrilla fully embraced the RPG with lots of different weapons, separate armor pieces and general items, all with different stats, I really believe that Forbidden West's world could end up having a lot more meaningful exploration. To make combat more meaningful, I want every machine to have multiple specific items that you can only get from that machine. Would be even better if you can only get them by shooting them off during battle. Zero Dawn does allow you to target parts of machines, but because the game makes no distinction between a metal vessel shot from a small enemy and one shot from a Thunderjaw, there's little reason to fight the Thunderjaw. I really liked how the original gameplay demo for Horizon Zero Dawn made it seem like Aloy was hunting for specifically the resources from the Grazers, but then they ran away after she got noticed, which meant she lost out on the resources. That's the type of gameplay that's interesting and makes things like setting traps actually worth it. Because imagine if it was really rare to see machines in the open world. Imagine if the map didn't have markers for where you can find a specific machine and you had to memorize the kind of environments where you're likely to find the machine in question. The moment you then spot it and prepare for the fight becomes a lot more special all of a sudden, doesn't it? Now a lot of this is probably wishful thinking. Guerrilla does seem to be following the Ubisoft formula for the most part, so I don't really know if they'll be pushing exploration much further than they have before, even though I really hope they will. The gameplay they've shown was quite scripted like the original reveal demo for Zero Dawn, so it's hard to gather if there will be more points of interest, more loot, or if there's a bigger incentive to hunt machines. I by the way recommend to look at the original gameplay demo for Zero Dawn so you get a good idea of what you can expect. They usually employ a lot of trickery to make everything seem better, and it's good to separate the demo flair from the actual gameplay shown. All that being said, there is genuinely a lot to like about the Forbidden West gameplay demo, and nothing that was shown I think negatively of. It already seems like they've done a lot to improve on the first game, which makes me hopeful. I love the way the melee looks, for example, and the underwater traversal looks breathtaking. Zero Dawn already had quite good combat for an RPG, and it's exciting to see Guerrilla push it even further. It has been a while since I've really been excited for a game, and this trailer did it for me. I don't think it has to be said, but these graphics, man, if they achieve the same fidelity in the end product, which they have a good track record of, I can't wait to play it. Just please let me enjoy the game this time around. Thank you very much for watching, I'll see you around.